Welcome. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Catholic Social Ministry Gatherings Community Workshop Sessions. We are so delighted to be able to share this time with you ahead of our live conversation on February 7th. Our topic today is healing as a church and nation, remembering, recognizing, and reimagining the common good. My name is Emily Schumacher-Novak, and I serve as the Assistant Director for Education and Outreach in the Department of Justice, Peace, Human Development at the USCCB. I have three wonderful panelists joining us to help illuminate the healing that we have to do as a church and a nation, and how our Catholic faith offers us these opportunities, and both the opportunities and the systems to help our brothers and sisters find healing. So I'd like to introduce our panelists this morning when I'm recording. First, we have Cheryllyn Branche. She's the president of GU 272, the Descendants Association, a nonprofit representing 10,000 living and deceased descendants of enslaved children, women, and men sold by the Jesuits of Georgetown University in 1838. Ms. Branche is a retired principal of Xavier University Prep, now St. Catherine Drexel Prep in New Orleans, Louisiana. Her ministries include coordinator for the Parish School of Religion, coordinator for Parish School of Religion, director of RCIA, the Social Justice Ministry, Adult Faith Formation, and is a member of the Parish Council at St. Gabriel the Archangel Catholic Church in New Orleans. Cheryllyn is married to James W. Baker III. Second, we have Kim Daniels, is the Associate Director for the Initiative on Catholic Social Thought and Public Life at Georgetown University. She was appointed by Pope Francis as a member of the Vatican Dicastery for Communication in 2016, and in that role was advisor to the organizing committee for the February 2019 Vatican meeting on the protection of minors. She's also a consultant to the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops for Religious Liberty, has advised the USCCB on other matters including migration, human life and dignity, responses to poverty, and care for creation. Kim is a graduate of Princeton University and the University of Chicago Law School, and she and her husband have 6 children. And then we have Krisanne Vaillancourt Murphy, who is the Executive Director of the Catholic Mobilizing Network. Krisanne has 25 years of experience working on the national level faith-based policy advocacy. She holds a master's degree in theology from Boston College, and Krisanne and her husband, Jay, reside in Washington, D.C. with their 3 children. I just want to say welcome to all 3 of you. Thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing your wisdom with us. We're so excited. As we dive in today, I find myself saying this a lot, maybe you do too, but so much has happened in the short week since the last time that we were able to sit down and chat about this presentation and about all of the things that are going on in our world and our church. When we proposed this workshop in early October, we knew our country was in the middle of a deeply fractious time in its history, and we knew that healing was needed in many corners of our world. We also knew that Catholic social teaching and our commitment to the common good could offer a framework for that healing, especially strengthened by the addition to our social teaching from Pope Francis in his new encyclical, Fratelli Tutti. In Fratelli Tutti, we find a strong call to remember our commitment to one another, and that it is lived out in more than just words. It requires us to act, to be engaged. For Catholics, our participation, our actions are part and parcel to our foundational belief in our inherent human dignity, which God bestows on each of us, each human person. We are required then to care about the suffering of our brothers and sisters. And it's exactly this framework that we are excited to share and talk about and think deeply about this commitment to the common good that we as Catholics bring to the public square to help our church, to help our nation, to help find healing. Our panelists today are going to share with us ways that they've seen in the past, remembering past wrongs and our failures to uphold the common good in catastrophic ways sometimes. Where we are currently, recognizing our current moment that we as Catholics have to offer to our brothers and sisters. What is it that the models of dialogue and engagement can give to us? And reimagining, where are we going next? What principles of our Catholic social teaching, of Fratelli Tutti, and of restorative justice can help us remember that we do belong to one another and that we are all God's children? And so with that, I'm really excited to sort of dive into this conversation, and I invite Cheryllyn to start us off today and sort of talk with us a bit about where is it that you see we have been with our commitment to common good, and what have we learned? And I'll go ahead and share that presentation.
Thank you. So thank you for the opportunity, and especially to the USCCB for this invitation. The response to what we want to understand as healing for our church and the nation has to begin, as we say, with GU 272, with the truth. With more than 10,000 descendants and counting at this point that we've identified, We know that the Society of Jesus and the Jesuits have kept very good records at Georgetown University and has an archives digitized with a treasure trove of information. We come to this juncture understanding that we need to begin to research our connections, especially in Louisiana, where at least one descendant found her connection in as early as 2004, with reference to Georgetown University and its Society of Jesus and this great sin. The truth was buried in the archives at Georgetown, and questions emerged from students at Georgetown University because they believed in what they had been told about the 1789 creation of Georgetown, the flagship university. You see, when you tell young people something, they have a way of holding us accountable. And so it was their movement in 2015, 2016 that led us to our understanding as an association. While Descendants organized into 3 distinct groups as a movement for truth, we pursued different avenues toward reparative justice. Our association was born 4 years ago, 182 years after the sale of our ancestors was revealed. And while we learned the true faith of our predecessors, known as the GU 272 now, we have since found that more than 314 original GU 272 ancestors were enslaved by the Jesuits. I hope that this truth provides some understanding of the historical context regarding our relationship with the work in which we are engaged in, the actions which we take as an association. We are a nonprofit formed in 2018 with the purpose of reuniting descendants, mitigating the effects of slavery, Jim Crow, and mitigating the denial of truth, while establishing a foundation with the Society of Jesus, the Catholic Church, and others as partners. We hope that this is a way forward. This original sin by the Society of Jesus and what you see on the screen is a listing of every person that was sold in the original GU 272 and the original 272. This is an actual document at Georgetown University's archives. This original sin strikes me spiritually as an 8th generation practicing Catholic, and personally because of the looming question: how can a Catholic order of men, the largest order of priests and brothers, seek to find God in all things and dedicate themselves to the greater glory of God and the good of all humanity, while denying our ancestors, enslaved children, women, and men, their freedom and dignity? Our ancestors have understood the Jesuits of Georgetown chose mammon over God. While we move beyond diversity and inclusion to belonging, that is, having our voices heard, what we have proposed to the Jesuits is a foundation, a truth, racial healing, and reconciliation foundation. The Catholic Church we know, love, and cannot apologize and walk away. Atonement is the only way forward. The Catholic Church has the greatest opportunity to join us to create a pathway forward, a different approach. Let me share with you that when our ancestors were enslaved and sold, the Jesuits, the United States, built institutions our founding fathers in the Catholic Church profited from. They built wealth and systemic systems of oppression lasting today. Truth is guiding our association to honor the legacy of our ancestors. They were sold, but we will not sell them again. Our Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation Foundation will be an investment in the future, a step forward. Our association has spent the last 3 years in dialogue with the Jesuits of the United States and Canada. If our church is not willing to step forward, who else should? We have documents that name ancestors. We have the ship manifest that name and describe each enslaved child, woman, and man. We have sale records that name and describe each enslaved person from 3 parishes in Louisiana where our ancestors were sold over and over. The Jesuits cannot pay enough for what they did, but they can invest in the future. If not now, when? Our church must invest also. Our association, again, has spent these years creating a partnership to mitigate the damage due to the sin the Jesuits have professed to, and that happened in 2017. We cannot and will not change our vision. The enslavement and selling of our ancestors was a sin against God and against all humanity. It's time that the church stand up and lead the rest of the world in truth, in racial healing and reconciliation. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryllyn. Thank you so much for sharing that story with us. There's just so much to unpack there. I'm wondering, can you share a little bit more about the images that were here? I just think they're so powerful, and I'm interested to know a bit more about them.
So sure. So the original documents that are held in Georgetown University's archives, this one is just the front cover, so to speak, for the enslaved manifest or slave listing. That particular document, I actually put my hands on at Georgetown. They allowed me to touch it. I was allowed to touch, if you look at the listing, the next slide, that particular portion, the slide that matches the last document, has a list of 272 people, children, women, and men. That one, yes, is the one where I can see my ancestors' names. And so the many other names of people, these were people, grandmothers sometimes, husbands and wives, families were sold together in family lots in small groups. And so they were sold to 3 planters in Louisiana. I have seen those original documents that are archived in Louisiana. And so those are things that make you want to react. You can't be Catholic and know something and not do something, not have a response. And so the work of my heart and my head has to manifest in my hands. And so that what we're doing as an association is to assume the work to bring forward what we feel is a cause and a problem in our nation. And if we don't know the truth, if we don't do something about it as a country, as a nation, and especially as Catholics, we're not Catholic. And the word Catholic means universal. And so we have to have a universal understanding of the truth and then do something to deal with what we have and what we know.
What a powerful story, Cheryllyn. Thank you for sharing that with us. It sounds, I can't even imagine what it felt like to put your hands on that document and to know the history and to sort of feel the weight of that history. And I appreciate so much that you're sharing with us this call to action as well, to know that we are all as Catholics called to do something, to say something. And I think your point about the sort of, as we've said, as many have said, the original sin of the United States that has systems and structures that persist to today, and our call to really think about what is it that we do to break those systems and to continue to unwind them from the very roots of our beginnings is so important, and that we as Catholics have something unique to offer to that because of our commitment to this common good. And so thank you so much for sharing that with us. As we turn to Kim, I'm wondering, Kim, can you share with us more about, where it is that you see us today? How is it that we make that change from recognizing, remembering the past, because we cannot move forward without recognizing the past. True healing cannot come without recognizing the history and the harms that have been done. So where is it that we go from here? What are those moments for engagement that we can hold on to?
Well, thanks so much, Emily. I'm just honored to be here with Krisanne, with you, Cheryllyn, with all of you out there who do so much to live out our Catholic faith in public life, in your work. I'm at Georgetown's Initiative on Catholic Social Thought in Public Life with my colleagues John Carr and Anna Misla, and our work is oriented around promoting dialogue, building bridges across religious, political, ideological lines, and encouraging a new generation of lay leaders to see their faith as something that adds to the common good and is central to the common good. So I'm just grateful to be here to talk about this challenging, overwhelming, awful time that we're in right now, and also about how we can look to Pope Francis, and in particular his recent encyclical Fratelli Tutti, to help us move forward with a truly Christian response. Fratelli Tutti is such a rich document. It expands on core themes of Pope Francis' pontificate, and I'm glad to be here discussing it with such thoughtful friends. Here's what I'd like to talk about, and Emily, I want to pick up first of all on what you said about recognizing our current context, where we are in our public life as a wounded church, as a hurting nation, to look to Pope Francis' approach and his priorities and Catholic social thought for guidance as to how to respond to this current situation, and also to look to Fratelli Tutti about how we can respond in this situation. How can we change things for the better? And how do we take up the call to what Pope Francis calls political charity as a response to this current moment? So first of all, where we are now, a wounded church and a hurting nation. And if you wouldn't mind forwarding the slides, that would be great. A wounded church. I think that right now we face so many challenges as a church. The first is COVID-19, which has brought with it, or it really brought out, the economic crisis that was underlying our what was going on in our society before the pandemic hit. It's really been something that's brought to the fore so many challenges we face, right? It's an economic crisis. It is a crisis of racial injustice. We've seen the division in our society between the haves and the have-nots. We've seen how the vulnerable suffer from this crisis more than others. And so in that sense, this of course has hurt the church as well. It's hurt us in terms of not being able to celebrate the sacraments and not being able to gather together as a community. It's hurt us financially in our ability for our social service ministries to help others, obviously as the need has become greater. Another crisis we face is the abuse crisis, right? That has just undermined the church's credibility so much. And while we're making concrete steps forward, there's still so much left to be done. We face polarization and division in our church. The opposition to Pope Francis, while it's narrow, it's well-funded and it's influential. And this kind of division harms our ability to witness in public life. And then there are the larger problems about the loss of young people, the secularization of our culture, the division that is stoked by social media. So right now, the situation that we're facing is truly something that is a challenge. Where do we go after that in terms of a hurting nation, right? Our nation faces some of these same challenges that I've already discussed. We face the global pandemic. We face an economic crisis and a crisis of racial injustice. We face this kind of polarization with a toxic and really exhausted culture in many ways. And there are lots of major forces that contribute to this. Right now, though, what I want to focus on is the crisis that we faced with the election and the attack on the Capitol, the impeachment of President Trump. We endured months of our president and his allies calling our election into question, working to disenfranchise millions of American citizens, and culminating in this attack on the Capitol. This is a real challenge for American Catholics as to how we are going to respond. Are we going to stand for truth and justice? Are we going to stand for the vulnerable? Are we going to look for a better kind of politics, a politics that is truly at the service of the common good, and move away from this kind of violence and this kind of fear? So that's our next question. And if you wouldn't mind advancing the slides, that would be great. Maybe to slide 7 or so. Right here, it would be great. I think the first response that we have is look to Catholic social thought through the lens of Pope Francis' leadership. We know that faith enriches public life, and that we bring it when we bring faith to public life, as Martin Luther King or Dorothy Day did, the pro-life movement does. We know that that enriches our public life. When people bring their deepest convictions to the arena, it makes the conversation so much richer. Secondly, I think we want to look at slide 8 to Pope Francis' approach and his priorities in living out the gospel in our current moment. He overall, not just in this recent document of Fratelli Tutti, but overall, he tries to resist the throwaway culture and build a culture of encounter. He leads with mercy and he focuses on a poor church for the poor. He always is reaching out to those at the margins. He looks at the church as a field hospital, and he stands with migrants and refugees in the search for peace and for caring for God's creation. Secondly, let's look to his approach in particular with Catholic social teaching in our current moment. Catholic social teaching obviously has been at the center of the church's approach to the world. It is how the church approaches the world. Pope Francis has particular priorities for it. And of course, we all see it as a moral framework that provides principles for action in public life. It's a moral vocabulary and architecture that non-Catholics can look to. So how can this help us navigate our current divisions? I think we can look to CST-based responses, if you wouldn't mind moving forward to slide 11. It helps us resist individualism. It reminds us that we're all in this together, and they hang together as an integrated whole, right? There's no left and right in Catholic social teaching, and that helps us come to the public conversation with a real renewal of our idea of resisting division in public life. We might move forward. We'll look now at Fratelli Tutti, which is Pope Francis's response to this particular situation we're in with COVID-19. Setting the stage for it, you can see when he was in St. Peter's Square, he stood alone. This was in March, just as the pandemic was really hitting. And he stood alone in the middle of St. Peter's Square, and he looked out at the world, and he talked about us not being afraid. This is not a moment for fear. He called us to look outward, not inward. He reminded us that we're part of an interconnected world. And these are themes that he'll carry forward in Fratelli Tutti, the encyclical that he released in this October. So let's look at the interpretive key of Fratelli Tutti, which is the parable of the Good Samaritan. And if you wouldn't mind going forward, thank you, Emily. The question is, who is my neighbor? And we as Catholics have an expansive answer to that question. Our neighbor is the one who treated him with mercy, and we're called to go and do likewise. And Pope Francis says the decision to include or exclude those lying wounded along the roadside can serve as a criterion for judging every economic, political, social, or religious project. So that's what political charity is all about, renewing our politics by looking at those wounded along the roadside and how we can help them. What are the central ideas? I'm just going to name a couple. The first, if you wouldn't mind moving it forward, is a reflection on how the church is to be in the world today. And Pope Francis says the church is a home with open doors. We are a human family. We are not a fortress, but we're at home. This means that we're called to renew our voice in public life by serving those weakest among us, by looking to Catholic social teaching. The second major idea, if you wouldn't mind moving the slide forward, is this idea of political charity. And again, this is the idea that we look at those who are weakest, the vulnerable, the voiceless, and we put them at the center of our politics. He calls not for political programs sort of specifically so much as conversion. This is about the gospel. This is about bringing our faith to public life, bringing Catholic social teaching to public life, and keeping the poor and the vulnerable at the center of it. He also finally calls us to remember to work for unity, to build relationships. And if you wouldn't mind moving that forward, he talks about next steps that we might face. And he says that politics, this might be the most countercultural thing that the church teaches, that politics is something good. It's more noble. It's more noble than marketing and media spin. That's not what we're about. The question is how many people endorsed, it's not how many people endorsed me or how many voted for me, but it's how much love did I put into my work? What did I do for the progress of people? What real bonds did I create? This is what's countercultural about the church. These are the questions we focus on. I want to just wrap up by saying that Catholic engagement in public life is just rich and it's complicated and it's important. It's local, it's national, it's global, it's institutions, it's popular movements, it's communities and families, and it's 1.4 billion diverse and individual people united by this shared faith that does justice. I'm so grateful to be a small part of raising that up. Pope Francis gives us a challenge with Fratelli Tutti to help raise that up in our public life today. And it's something that's so sorely needed. And I'm grateful to be talking about this here with you today.
Find the unmute button. Thank you so much, Kim, for sharing all of that with us. It's so, I think you're right. There's so much in Fratelli Tutti and in Catholic social thought that sort of brings us, from the naming the history that we have that Cheryllyn shared with us into action and to sort of looking around and sort of seeing where it is and really recentering where it is that we're going. I love that idea of political charity that Pope Francis speaks about. I hope and I wish that we spend a lot more time thinking about how is it that we recenter those who are on the margins, those who find themselves oppressed or victims of injustice, in our society. And those are the folks who can help lead us to what is the solutions to our problems. Where is it that we go from here? How do we sort of fully realize God's kingdom together? So thank you for sharing all of those things with us. And Krisanne, I'm going to invite you to sort of pick up on our thread here of where is it that we're going next. There's so much to share and to think about that Kim has sort of like put her eyes on where are we, and sort of the question is like, what is next? How is it that we put these principles into action? How is it that we sort of take what we've been talking about this morning and move it into sort of the next thing? What is it that the Catholics can offer specifically to our brothers and sisters? And I invite you to share with us a bit about that.
Well, thanks, Emily, and it's so good to be with you, Cheryllyn and Kim. What an honor it is to talk about Fratelli Tutti and the things that we love as Catholic women leading in the church. I guess I would just say that for those of you who don't know about Catholic Mobilizing Network, you can go ahead. We work to end the death penalty and promote restorative justice. And so when I'm speaking today, I'm speaking from that perspective of working very deep in both of these areas as part of our faith expression in the church. And I have to tell you, when Fratelli Tutti came out in October, it was such a breath of fresh air. And I feel like it has just guided our work ever since we've read it and really spent time with it. I think so much of what Cheryllyn had mentioned, really in the practical sense of the truth telling and the proactive work that they're doing with GU 272, and then also all of what Kim had shared about political charity and kind of this framework that Fratelli Tutti uses, again, to guide our reimagination with how do we be Catholics in the world, in a hurting, wounded world. So Catholic Mobilizing works on ending the death penalty and promoting restorative justice. And those two things combined really just elucidate that every person, no matter the harm one has caused or suffered, should be afforded dignity and should be offered an opportunity for redemption. And so in Fratelli Tutti, Pope Francis offers this backdrop of honoring every human person and looks at not just COVID and not just kind of the ills of our day, but also our history, and says, how do we recognize where we've been? How do we see, what harm has happened in our past, and how do we move forward in a way, again, that's fitting of Catholics? So he talked about renewing a path for encounter, a path for renewed encounter moving forward. And he talked about creating peacemakers. So this is Catholics. This is you and me. This is so many of us who are doing ministry in the church. He talked about men and women who are prepared to work boldly and creatively to initiate processes of healing and renewed encounter. And so when you listen to Cheryllyn, you see how they're doing that with the history of 272 enslaved men and women, and how are they processing this healing and how are they moving forward. And so many folks who are part of the Catholic Social Ministry Gathering are doing important ministry in the church and recognizing harms and recognizing wounds. And so much of Fratelli Tutti starts, or that background of what are the harms of our day. Of course, there's the global pandemic of COVID. We live in a throwaway culture. We see that with a mass incarceration. With a culture of death, there are many representations of that. Certainly for us who work in the death penalty, it's watching people lose their lives, especially after the needless executions of 13 people just coming off of this last federal execution spree. And a culture of indifference, really seeing people who are just overwhelmed and can't bear to care anymore. And so recognizing these wounds that we're living in our world. The other part of it is the next slide, reimagining the common good. Pope Francis basically sets our sights forward and offers us principles we use these at Catholic Mobilizing to define the principles of restorative justice, but I think they fit perfectly for what is framed in Fratelli Tutti about upholding dignity, building relationships, seeking healing, and enabling transformation. I mean, that is what Pope Francis is setting our gaze toward. Next, So who has been excluded? Again, with the example from Catholic Mobilizing Network, the death penalty, we see so much woundedness. And he talks about this. He talks about capital punishment and the church's opposition and not moving back from that, not stepping away. And the encyclical, he's leveraging the weight of the encyclical to yet again talk about how the death penalty is inadmissible in our day. Again, so the woundedness of the death penalty, we see an unjust criminal legal system that encourages people to say nothing and admit to nothing. It often leaves the voices of victims out of the process. We witness racial bias at play. Certainly, this capital punishment is leading from a legacy of lynching and slavery. We've seen those ties. We see the enormous pain and suffering of murder victim family members, and also the suffering of those who've been isolated by incarceration. So we just see these many ripples of collateral damage. So many wounds by this example of one of the harms in our society. So how can we, next slide, how can we be proactive and seek reconciliation? And I'm going to spend a couple minutes with this because reconciliation and forgiveness, it means a lot. And when we don't understand it, when we rush to forgiveness, or when we just talk about unity, that's kind of just, scratching the surface, we really don't get to the heart of what makes people accountable, what makes for good healing. So proactive reconciliation, he talks about these 4 particular elements in Fratelli Tutti. And I'll just say that the clear memory, which Cheryllyn, I think there's not a better example when you think about actually touching the manifest and reading the names, knowing who existed, and then following where people have ended up decades and decades later. You're looking back at the past with a clear memory. Truth-telling, we need to be honest about facts. It's inseparable. Truth, justice, and mercy, they need to be bound together. So when we're looking to reconcile, we need to be able to understand the truth. Next, we need to resist revenge. Pope Francis warns against being obsessed with taking revenge and destroying the other. We can see this when there has been oppression, when there has been harm and there has been hurt. There's a vicious boomerang of, well, we want to create hurt for somebody else. We want to create punishment. I mean, capital punishment is the tip of the iceberg on a broken criminal justice system. It is the epitome of punishment and revenge. So Pope Francis is saying you need to resist that. That is one way that you can help to create the conditions for true reconciliation. And then lastly, we need to understand forgiveness, what it is and what it isn't, because when we don't understand it, we can re-victimize those who have been harmed. Next. So memory, a thought about memory. We can't move forward without remembering the past. We do not progress without honest and unclouded memory. Again, I think Cheryllyn has a perfect example. Truth-telling, next. We need to tell, when you're looking at historical harms, we need to tell families what happened. We can't just forget, we can't just bury. We need to uplift the memory of victims. We need to tell the truth. This could be in situations with missing relatives. This could be when minors have been recruited by cruel and violent people. Could be about women who have been victims of violence and abuse. We need to recognize and tell the truth. Again, resisting revenge. Next. Revenge is something that's mentioned 12 times in Fratelli Tutti. Pope Francis absolutely wanted to make sure that we knew that we should steer clear. Revenge is also something, when I often talk about the death penalty, that we say is the underbelly of the system of capital punishment. At best, indifference to revenge is what allows 25 states to still have death penalty on their books in the US. So Pope Francis seeks to expose the seeds to violence in our heart, in our systems and structures that continue to perpetuate harm, more violence, more harm, more hurt. So again, we need to resist that revenge. He says nothing is gained this way and everything is lost. So forgiveness. Forgiveness is something that is not, it's not solely attributed to Catholics. We understand that in the Christian understanding of the gospel, forgiveness is a grace, and forgiveness is, you know, God's perhaps greatest gift to us. But when we don't understand it, we can force it or demand it. And again, we can re-victimize. So next, forgiveness is not yielding ground or influence. It's not about letting criminals continue. It's not about allowing the oppressor to keep oppressing. It is not a sign of weakness. Forgiveness is a sign of strength, and Pope Francis reminds of this. He also says forgiveness is not forgetting. Again, that truth-telling and that memory, that clear memory, says you can't forget. We're not being asked to forget. We're being asked to remember in a new way. It can, forgiveness cannot be about ignoring past harms. It cannot be demanded, as I mentioned, and it's not always possible. We can help to create the conditions for the possibility, but sometimes there has been so much harm, we understand, that it's just not humanly possible yet for people to forgive. So what is forgiveness? Next. Forgiveness is gratuitous. It needs to be freely given. It cannot be demanded. It cannot be on a timeline. And it's not something we can speak for others. Forgiveness is something that is free and that is a grace, and it's freely given. It is possible to pardon when someone's not asked for forgiveness themselves. So that means we can forgive when we have been hurt and the person who has harmed us has not begged our pardon. We can forgive because it's a gift to ourselves. Forgiveness also enables us to pursue real justice, not revenge, not just, again, that boomerang. Forgiveness is about allowing transformation. And we know that pain and conflict can transform us, but we have to have the right relationship with the harm done. And forgiving can help us allow that transformation to happen. Lastly, I'll just say that there's a couple of resources, and I know in the Q&A we'll get more specific with CSMG participants, but I just wanted to offer, especially given what Cheryllyn has talked about and what Kim has also shared, I think that these resources could be quite useful. Catholic Mobilizing has a small book called Harm, Healing, and Human Dignity. It's a faith formation guide on restorative justice. And it's just a small question, you know, for small groups. It's an excellent resource if you're just interested in dipping your toe in restorative justice. Also, for the movie Just Mercy, it was also a New York Times bestseller about that intersection of racial reckoning and capital punishment, which I think has been illuminated here. That's an excellent film, and Catholic Mobilizing has a Catholic study guide to help small groups or individuals. And lastly, as I mentioned earlier, the federal execution spree that happened over these last 7 months and after a 17-year hiatus, we're still reeling from that. We have a new president coming in who has already talked about opposing the death penalty, and Catholic Mobilizing has a petition to President-elect Biden about what he can do to make concrete steps toward ending the death penalty in the US. Thank you.
Thank you, Krisanne, for all of that. Really wonderful sort of review of everything that was going on and sort of our next steps in that. I think a couple of points that you hit on are really powerful for us as we sort of remember where we've been, looking at where we are, and moving towards our next, towards where we go next, towards this reimagining, is like, how do we sort of hold together as Catholics that the truth of what has happened, the harms that have been done, and the possibilities that we know that Jesus gives to us, that we have the possibility to be transformed, and yet that we are we are called to hold these really difficult truths at the same time. And I think that that's really indicative of the gospel as well. Sort of like we are called to do the things that are not always easy, to do the things that are not always hard, to engage even though apathy is strong or that it feels difficult. And so thank all three of you for all of your comments today. And I'm so excited for our live session. I wish we had time today to dive into all of these areas of conversation, because I really am so excited about all of the gifts that you all bring to the church. And I'm so grateful that you're willing to share it with us. So thank you for helping us to keep thinking deeply about this common good and our shared commitment to it. I'm even more excited for our conversation on February 7th during the Catholic Social Ministry Gathering. So if all of you who are watching this, please don't forget to join us for that live conversation and bring your questions. We are excited about that conversation that we'll get to have with these wonderful panelists and with all of you. We'll do a very brief recap of our comments here today, but then we're going to really dive right into those questions with all of our CSMG participants. So thank you all for your willingness to be here. Thank you for everybody joining us, and for all of those who are watching at home, thank you for your time today. We are really grateful. Thank you, Cheryllyn, to Kim, and to Krisanne again for joining us and for all of your work. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Emily.
Thank you.